Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udikang. It's a show where we chat about business analysis and project management issues and the challenges and triumphs within those fields. It's inspiring, it's informative, but most of all, of course, it's very much inquisitive. My guest today is a senior leadership board advisor and executive educator. He's also a coach for corporate leaders and CEO of the Nour Group. He's helping leading organizations recognize the many quantifiable ways that relationships drive everything from strategy, innovation, growth, and profitability. He's also author of 10 books, including the bestsellers Relationship Economics and Co-Create, as well as his upcoming 11th book, Curve Benders. Please help me welcome to today's show, joining us from Atlanta, David Nour. Welcome, David.
Marcus, it's good to be with you.
It's fantastic, and I thank you for your time for being on the show. I thought I'd start off by asking you, and what's intrigued me about you is that you thrive in developing and nurturing strong relationships. And that's something that sort of perked up my interest about your book, which we'll talk a bit about later. But how has this helped you become the CEO of the Nour Group?
I have to tell you my personal story. So the short answer is I believe it's as a good blend of nature versus nurture. So I'm originally from Iran, born to a middle-class family. And Marcus, I didn't get it then, but I think I was 5 or 6 years old, walking to the bazaars of Iran with my dad on Friday errands. And dad didn't just have a list of things mom needed or items he wanted around the house. Dad also had a relationship list. Mm-hmm. And he made sure we visited with key individuals or people that he wanted to nurture, not for any transactional reason, but just kind of feeding and care of those relationships. So I tell you that story because I would submit that the rest of the world builds relationships first from which they do business. I came to the States as a teenager. I grew up here. I love our country. You come to the States or any European or a lot of other Western cultures, and if and only if the business part works, I may ask you about your family. I may ask you about how you've dealt with this pandemic. So hence the disconnect when we go into places and they don't look like us, sound like us, or come from our backgrounds, right? So I am on a 20-year, this is the year 20 of my practice. I feel like a mission, flag-carrying mission that says if you lead with the relationship, the outcomes, the business outcomes you seek will come. And I've been blessed. I came to this country through, again, relationships. I was able to adapt. I got into the school I wanted to, and several jobs have all been through relationships. I got into grad school, I became president of a company. I worked at a private equity firm, started my firm. And early on, you have no clients. And most of my clients, 90% of my work comes from referrals and introductions. And I'm a big believer of you do a great job and make that client feel like they're your only client, and they have relationships and other executives they know and other people they introduce you to. And similarly, for project management professionals, right? If you commit to exceptionalism, if you commit to being the very best at what you do, and it doesn't replace, and build a strong portfolio of relationships within your organization, external to it, I can't imagine bigger opportunities or greater initiatives or working on the Olympics or any of the other things you aspire to get to wouldn't come your way. So that's a very long answer to tell you that I'm a poster child for relationships quantifying your personal and professional success.
Fantastic. So what really is a curve bender, and where did this idea of curve bender actually come from?
Sure. So we all heard flatten the curve through this pandemic, and everybody thinks I jumped in on this idea in the middle of this pandemic. It actually takes me about 4 years to think about, research, interview, write, edit, rewrite books. And so I actually began this idea right after my last book, Co-Create, came out in 2017. And again, very quickly, my first book was called Relationship Economics. Book number 10, as you mentioned, Co-Create. Curve Benders 11, I called that my Star Wars trilogy. Because in relationship economics, I talked a lot about how to be more intentional in the relationships you choose to invest in. So imagine a contact that you invest in and you get reciprocal value from, and they become a relationship. Those few of those relationships you invest in over time. You may go through some ups and downs together. You really prioritize, and they also push you to learn and grow. Those become strategic relationships. I thought of, and I've been thinking a lot about this for the last 4 years, a few of those relationships, Marcus, do more than just help us execute. They do more than just help us perform our job or deliver short-term, maybe transactional results. They have a profound impact on shaping who we become. And my litmus test is, if you think back on your own journey, there's typically a professor that shaped the way you thought in your formative years, or maybe a school teacher, and really led you in a direction. Maybe there's a boss or a coach or mentor that beyond the product or service or the market or competitors took you under his or her wings and taught you how to be an empathetic leader, how to be a compassionate leader, how to really engage and influence others. Those relationships that create an indelible imprint on not just what we accomplish, but who we become, I call curve benders. And I'm happy to elaborate and give you the context of how I reference them in the book. But that's what curve benders are. And that's the genesis of the idea.
Oh, fascinating. So throughout the book, you emphasize this idea of non-linear growth, right? And how is this really different than how we learn and grow today?
Great question. So full disclosure, I'm 53. I think a lot about what will work look like for me in the next decade, right? And I think this pandemic has done that to a lot of people, right? So pre-pandemic, I was on the road 208 days. I can't imagine going back to that. I miss traveling, but I don't want to be I actually like my wife and my kids, and I like my own bed, right? So you start to really rethink about what is it that I do and what is it that I enjoy doing. And I think a lot of people have been elated not to deal with commutes or deal with all the stuff that we did pre-pandemic, right? So we started doing a lot of research on what we turned out to call forces, specifically 15 forces that I believe in our research, empirical data shows will continue to disrupt us more so in the next decade than ever in our past. And to give your audience one example, I recently saw a demonstration of an artificial intelligence machine learning engine that scanned and analyzed 10,000 sheets of paper in about 8 seconds. So if your value is reviewing documents, newsflash, that job is going to have a very short shelf life, right? So technology is just one. This pandemic, as an example of Black Swan event, is just one. And we've identified 15 that are going to continue to disrupt not just the way we work, but also the way we live, the way we play, and the way we give to others. To remain relevant, you're going to have to reinvent yourself. And one of the best reinvention models I know is that personal S-curve. So initially you invest, then you hit your stride, then you really build some competency up that S-curve, and you start to build, really excel at it. Then you actually reach the top of the S-curve, which really you start to plateau. Said another way, you're bored. I know it, you know it, everybody else knows it, because it shows. And it shows in the way you show up. And if somebody doesn't jolt some excitement, light a fire within you, I've never believed lighting a fire under anybody lasts. But if somebody doesn't light a fire within you, you then start to decline. And again, you start to wing it. You start to hit the snooze button way too many times in the mornings, right?
Yeah.
So to remain relevant in that personal reinvention, I don't believe traditional linear learning and growth will suffice. So linear growth is, think of your 4-year college degree, right? I don't know when was the last time you used differential calculus, but it's been a while for me, right? As a matter of fact, the Gallup organization says something like less than 40% of Americans are in the field which they received a degree for within 10 years of graduating from college. So that 4-year investment, think of all the classes we took and we learned some great stuff that we never use. It's the exact same way in many learning and development organizations. Conversely, I believe in what I call micro-learning. So I don't need a 4-year MIT degree. I just want to learn the code. So how do I learn something small, bite-size, that I can immediately put to use? And by the way, start to daisy chain these micro-learning opportunities to remain relevant. The whole challenge in the future of work isn't just being relevant once at a point in time, it's to remain relevant. And only when you embrace this idea of micro-learning will you do that. And I believe, again, coming back full circles, few relationships are the best source for those micro-learning, for the application of that learning, for you to learn in a hockey stick and non-linear growth versus that 45-degree angle, learn, maybe at some point in the future apply.
Fascinating. Yeah, I get excited every time I listen to you and watching your videos. I got to listen to more. So,
and that's by the way, that's how we all absorb things. Like we watch TED videos or we watch a little snippet of something. Oh, that's interesting. I want to go do more of that. I don't want to go spend, again, years trying to, nothing against the traditional academic environment other than it's really outdated. But these micro learnings, particularly for professionals, are much more relevant at the time that we need them, on the device of our choice, and the best way we can soak this in to then immediately apply it.
Fascinating. What about the concept of personal market value? Can you describe this a bit and some of its key attributes?
Sure. So I spent a number of years at a private equity firm, and I've been around the mergers and acquisitions and the capital markets a good bit. And if you think about a company will make certain moves, whether it's go after a new market or go after a new market segment or add new products or services or acquire another company, all in an effort to increase its market value. Most people understand that fairly straightforward concept. So then I thought, in my journey from now to next, here's where I am today. Here's what's going well. If I want to get to that next tier, next level as a project professional, today I'm running a function, I want to become a P&L leader. I'm a P&L leader and I want to run a bigger business unit. I want to go run a very different geography, right? What has to happen for me to increase my market value, very similar to how companies do it? So we came up with, and again, a lot of our research led to this, of what are the top attributes that individuals get hired? What are the top attributes that they get promoted from their peers? And what are some of those X factors that delineate seemingly equally competent peers? And we've come up with a set of foundational rings. This is getting your house in order, right? By the way, I've never seen somebody who's got a dysfunctional home go be a superstar at work, or vice versa. They're miserable at home, at work, and they come home and they're lovely as they can be, right? It just is not, it's not congruent, right? So there's a set of personal kind of foundations. Then there's a set of growth enablers. Then there's a set of value accelerants. And they range everything from your financial acumen, right? How well do you understand if you've ever raised capital, if you've ever been involved with really understanding how P&L works and what are the levers, all the way to your relational reach. Who can you access? Can you open doors? Who can you get in touch with? Who's going to return your calls within 24 hours, right? All the way up to your personal brand and professional brand, and that S curve, that personal reinvention. Resilience is another fascinating attribute. So if you want that bigger job, and it's not for everybody, but if you want that bigger role, understand that's a pretty expensive real estate and very limited real estate. Number two, what are you willing to do to increase your personal market value?
Fantastic. You suppose that growth grid Growth grid. Let's talk about the growth grid a bit. You know, how can this help us solve complex challenges, help us address these new opportunities?
Sure. So I'm a big fan of Drucker,
Yeah.
and one of Peter Drucker's, I'm paraphrasing, but one of my favorite quotes from him is, "There are very few things as useless, and in some cases dangerous, than the right answer to the wrong
Mhm.
question." And I would submit, whenever we face a challenge or an opportunity, I don't believe everybody's broken. So it could be either I'm trying to fix something or I'm trying to take advantage of an upside. We often ask, what should we do and how should we do it? We don't ask enough who questions. Marcus, who do we need? Who do we know? How do I leverage what I believe to be my biggest asset beyond my educational foundation, beyond my professional pedigree? My dad drove into me, life is way too short for you to make all the mistakes yourself, right? None of us can figure all this out by ourselves. By the way, newsflash, it is going to continue to get more complex. If you think our lives are complex now, it is. I have seen technology, I've seen trends, I've seen all kinds of obstacles that are ahead for all of us. So in that increased complexity, your biggest asset are, again, not the masses, but a few strategic relationships. And what I identified in the growth grid are 4 distinct phases between concrete identifying what the challenge is, and then conceptually, how could we go tackle that? Concrete, let's build something. Conceptually, figure out how do we reiterate it. But this growth grid goes through an iterative process. It really comes from that lean movement. It comes from the lean startup movement. It comes from this notion. A mentor drove into me, one of my curve benders years ago, version 1 is better than version none, right? And by the way, when you're 60% ready, when you're 80% ready, move. We'll figure out the remaining, versus if you wait for it to be perfect, you're going to miss the market opportunity. You're going to miss that chance. So I've brought a lot of this sage wisdom over the years, and I've overlaid it to the relationships I've leveraged, never use, I've leveraged to solve complex problems. And the relationships I've interviewed, Dennis Sadlowski, former CEO of Siemens Energy and Automation, Casey Choi, head of global B2B mobile at Samsung. Some of the executives I interviewed for this book subconsciously have been doing this. Randy Seidel was one of the top executives at HPE. They've subconsciously have done this, solving complex challenges, addressing opportunities through the network, through their relationships. I just codified it. I just created a construct that I believe is now not only more understandable, but I believe it's repeatable and predictable, and it can be taught. And that's the whole point. Is that's interesting. What if I applied this framework to this challenge? Could that help accelerate my ability to solve it?
Fantastic. What about the 7 steps involved in the curve benders? Can you explain a bit more detail about those?
Sure. So as you can imagine, as your audience can imagine, when I tell people that curve benders can profoundly impact your future direction and ultimate destination, their very next question is, where do I find these magical, mystical creatures, right? Can I meet one this afternoon? Because I got a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I like blueprints as much as anybody. Why don't I come up with a set of steps and genuinely a blueprint of, you don't have a crystal ball. You're not going to know that Marcus is a curve bender today. So you're going to have to go down this path to really identify who demonstrates a vested interest in you, who's aligned, whether it's their values or the mission or vision or enemy. Think of overregulation, right? That sees the best version of you and wants to see you succeed. So it begins with really your mindset of Is it growth oriented? Is it digital? Is it entrepreneurial? Even if you have a job and you get a paycheck inside a company, you have to start thinking much more entrepreneurial. You have to act like you own the place. You have to act like you own that project, initiative, division, business unit, product, whatever it is, right? That then leads to a unequivocal commitment to be the very best at what you do. And Marcus, regrettably, a lot of people I meet are not willing to do the incredibly difficult work necessary to become world-class. If you make that commitment that I don't care what the job is, I'm going to be the best at what I do, you're going to stumble upon what I call the next step is a catalyst. I'm going to take you back to one of the first chemistry class you may have had. If you remember a chemical reaction where you threw two chemicals together and that became a catalyst for change, you start to believe there's got to be a better next for me. There's got to be a better, bigger opportunities or next thing I want to reach for, which then leads to what I call immersive inquiry, where you jump in with both feet and you really want to soak in as much as you can about this topic and about this issue. Right now, I'm studying a lot around ecosystems and platform design and systems thinking when it comes to overlay systems thinking with your relationships, right? So I've immersed myself and I've got 6, 7 additional books in my head in various stages. But once you immerse yourself in this topic, you then find your water cooler, your watering hole. You find others that are similarly passionate about that topic, similarly have stumbled on that catalyst and are really interested in this area. And you start to build and nurture these relationships. And people around the watering hole all know each other, right? So you talk to one person, they're like, oh, you should talk to Jim. And Jim says, oh, Susan's doing some interesting stuff. Let me introduce you to Susan. And next thing you know, you've built this cadre or this cohort of people that are all passionate and focused on the same fundamental challenge or opportunity. As you execute with agility, and I'm not talking about agile or waterfall, but in terms of with intensity, with intentionality, with enormous amount of a sense of urgency to really make that difference, you start to really then kind of prune back of who are great people and good contacts, good relationships, strategic relationships. Oh my gosh, these 2-3 people are going to change my direction, my destination. And very quickly, our research actually shows that we fight them, right? Marcus can't be right about it, right? He can't be right about this, right? Susan can't have the answers, right? We actually fight them. And then we have one of those V8 moments like, are you kidding me? Right? I would be dumb as dirt if I don't go back to Marcus and embrace that idea, because I think he's exactly right. And so we get away, we kind of continue our trajectory for a while, and then it hits us, and then we kind of come back and we do. And I've seen this, and I'm now looking at longitudinal data that says you wouldn't be where you are today if you didn't listen to that manager, that leader, that coach, that mentor, that curve bender so many years ago.
This is how we can all become a curve bender in everyone else's lives, right? We can all help influence.
Which you just stumbled upon. I don't get surprised often in my research and my writing, but that was one of the ones that, again, one of my mentors, one of my curve benders brought up over sushi in Park City when I first brought up curve benders, again, 17, 18, right? I said, well, what I want to do is give people a roadmap on how they can identify, nurture, really sustain these incredible relationships that are going to profoundly change their lives. So they're going to be very curious about, how do I find curve benders? He said, you're missing a really profound question, which is, how do we become curve benders in the lives of others? Because one of the myths in life is, I'll do that when.
Oh, yeah.
I'll do that when I become a vice president. I'll do that when I become wealthy. I'll do that when my startup, exits. I'll do that when I get promoted. I'll do that at some point in life. And next thing you know, 20 years have gone by. So I've always believed none of us are ever too old or too young to be a mentor or find mentors. You have to care. You have to care enough about not just that project or that initiative, but you got to care about people. And by the way, you cannot, you don't have the bandwidth to invest in everybody equally. So if you tighten your aperture, if you listen louder to who's demonstrating that initiative, who is has that latent talent that they don't yet see themselves, and really embrace them, take them under your wings, teach them, again, not just the transactional business, but really help them see that long tail value, that longer horizon. I think you just might be someone they think incredibly fondly of 20 years from now.
Fantastic. So you mentioned earlier about the Star Wars trilogy, the last three books, Relationship Economics, Co-Create, Curve Benders. Why the idea of the Star Wars trilogy?
Number one, I'm a huge fan. I geek out over Star Wars movies, right? They're cool. I mean, the vision of Lucas and company back then, Spielberg and company, is just unbelievable. Each book can absolutely stand alone on its own. But if you do get a chance to read these three, you'll really understand the stair step that I mentioned, because most of us meet plenty of contacts. When you invest in them, they become a relationship. When you further reciprocate the value, they become strategic. Curve benders are not everyday contacts. These people are far and few in between, and they're only gonna come. And by the way, I haven't found the fifth rung of the ladder where I can skip the first few yet, right? Luke Skywalker's journey makes a lot more sense if you watch, 4, 5, and 6. Right? And then somebody asked me, so will there be a prequel? I'm post. Actually, bizarre manner, as I said, I've got several other books in my head, and I am thinking about accelerated relevance. I'm thinking about the immigrant success DNA. I'm thinking a lot about inner circle. I'm thinking a lot about a clarity of intent. So these are all ideas that I believe further develop real, authentic, value-based relationships, not for a reason, not even for a season, but for a lifetime. And when I'm long gone, all I can do is pray that any of this work made a difference in one person's life.
What are you most looking forward to in the post-pandemic world?
Are you kidding? I never thought I'd say this, but I miss traveling. Oh my gosh. Marcus, full disclosure, I'm a hugger, right? So I recently met a senior executive for a socially distant cup of coffee, and I haven't seen him in 14 months. And you're going to love this. So this is my vaccination card. I've actually laminated, and I carry it around with me. But I told him when we met, I said, I've been vaccinated. He's like, so have I. I said, good, give me a hug. So I miss traveling. I miss seeing clients. I miss getting on stages and engaging audiences. And I'm blessed that my clients are all over the world. And, so I miss the travels. I miss exploring. So years ago, a mentor, it's amazing how we're all products of the advice we take. A mentor said, throw away your stopwatch, get a compass. And what he meant was, doesn't matter how fast you do something, because I would fly somewhere, do my speaking, coaching, educational program, whatever, and fly right back. And it's like, you're missing out on life. So several years ago, I started to fly somewhere, and I would either go be a tourist if I hadn't been there before, or go rent motorcycles. I ride motorcycles, and instead of the garbage on TV in my hotel room, go explore, go ride motorcycles in the area, right? Vegas comes to mind. I was in Vegas 12 times in 1 year, just various speaking engagements. And it's a big meeting and space and convention city, as you know. So I miss that terribly. I miss that chance to travel, see friends, like everybody else that's got their wings clipped. There's some great relationships that I haven't seen in person for 14 months. So I'm looking forward to that. I am not looking forward to, and I'm a big proponent of this. I don't believe there's any going back. So when you hear people say, I can't wait to get back to, I think there's only going forward, number one. Number two, I really believe a lot of leaders at the moment are thinking about this idea of coming back to work completely wrong. Because you hear, should we go back 3 days or 2 days? Versus, how do we reimagine work? How do we rethink about outcomes, not output? Because this grand experiment of sending 100 million people home to work from home for the last 14 months has worked surprisingly well. And by the way, they worked more and they were more productive and they didn't commute and they saved money on gas and traffic and all those things. So instead of thinking physically, how do we come back? How do we move forward in rethinking, reimagining, if not reinventing? A lot of was flawed and it was broken before the pandemic.
Yeah. Talking about connecting and engaging with people, how can anyone in the audience get in touch with you if they want to?
Sure. So fairly straightforward. Our website is just Nour Group, nourgroup.com. There's a blog, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of videos. There's a curve bender specific landing page. And I would welcome it. We also have a private community called the Nour Forum. So, and you'll see that nourgroup.com/forum. I would encourage all of your listeners. There's a very active project management professional group there. Come join us. Come join the conversation. Come join the discussion. Would love to have you.
Nice. And I've watched your YouTube. Absolutely fascinating too.
Very kind.
Great. Thanks for coming on the show, Dave. It's been educational, it's been informative, and it's been intriguing. Thank you.
Marcus, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, fantastic. Have yourself a great day in Atlanta. And hopefully the heat can keep you much warmer than the cold in Calgary.
Sounds great.
Okay, take care. Bye.
You too.